I might point out what St. Paul says to Timothy, a young bishop, in the preceding verse. Remain faithful to what you have learned and believed, because you know from whom you learned it, and that from infancy you have known the sacred Scriptures. What Scriptures is Paul talking about? In context, the only Scripture that Timothy could have known from his infancy is the Old Testament.
Notice how Roman Catholic author, speaker, and podcaster Matthew Arnold in this video states the only Scriptures Timothy would have known about from his infancy are the Old Testament Scriptures. In fact, the Apostle Peter in his second epistle, chapter 3, verse 16, compared all of Paul's epistles to the rest of the Scriptures, meaning a settled Old Testament canon, which the foreword to the deuterocanonical book of Sirach uses the same language for the threefold Jewish canon. Quote, the law, the prophets, and the rest of the books of our ancestors, end quote. Again, rest meaning a settled canon which predated the days of Jesus ben Sirach's grandfather prior to AD 200. According to the New American Bible, the NAB, authorized by the Confraternity of Christian Doctrine and approved by the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, the footnote to the foreword to Sirach refers to this threefold division as, quote, the sacred scriptures of the Old Testament written before the time of Sirach, according to the threefold division of the present Hebrew Bible, end quote. Thus, affirming the Old Testament canon of both contemporary Jews and Protestants is both Christian as well as pre-Sirach. Also, in the NAB, in the introduction of Paul's first epistle to Timothy, it dates the pastoral epistles to around AD 63 to 67, and its intro to 2 Timothy reads, quote, the letter suggests that Timothy should prepare others to replace himself as Paul has prepared Timothy to replace him, chapter 2, verses 1 to 2, end quote. This suggests Timothy was likely in his 30s when Paul wrote this epistle, since he was already traveling with Paul in Acts 17. This would mean Timothy would have been in his infancy around the time of Jesus' ministry. And although Timothy's father was Greek, according to Acts 16, his mother was Jewish, which 2 Timothy 1:5 reveals he would have been taught the Old Testament scriptures by his Jewish mother Eunice and his grandmother Lois. This means at the latest the Hebrew Bible was completed before the time of Christ, which would have excluded the deuterocanonical books since the Jews did not accept them, which even Roman Catholic apologists agree. Click the link on the screen where I demonstrate that 22 books of the completed Hebrew Bible was indeed pre-Christian.
I might point out what St. Paul says to Timothy, a young bishop, in the preceding verse. Remain faithful